boundless environment and supposedly went where no man had gone before.
It's looking good, down a half. Lights on, picking up some dust. 4 forward, drift into the right a little. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. We copy you down, Eagle. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Was getting to the moon first so important that the US government would consider faking it?
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6.
On October the 4th, 1957, the Soviets terrified America when they sent Sputnik, the world's first satellite, into orbit.
The New York Times had to publish an article explaining to Americans that it did not carry nuclear bombs that could be dropped on the city from that altitude.
Many feared that the Soviet Union's ultimate goal was to put a missile base on the moon. Meanwhile, America's space program was having difficulty even getting off the ground.
The chances of getting to the moon and returning safely to Earth were something like 0.0017%. In other words, virtually an impossibility. The astronauts were launched with the Saturn V. Then, in order to account for their disappearance, they simply orbited the Earth for 8 days. And in the interim, they showed these fake pictures of the astronauts on the moon. But on the 8th day, the command capsule separated from the vehicle and descended to Earth, as of course was shown in films. The noise level of a rocket engine is up into the 140, 150 decibel range. In other words, enormously loud. How would it be possible to hear astronauts' voices against the background of a running rocket engine?
Picking up some dust. 30 feet, 2.5 down. Straight shadow. 4 forward, drift into the right a little. Contact light.
Come and take a trip in my rocket ship. We'll have a lovely afternoon. Kiss the world goodbye, and away we'll fly. Destination moon. We'll travel fast as a light till we're out of sight. The Earth will be like a toy balloon. What a thrill you'll get riding on my jet. A destination moon.
Just months before this historic landing, a prototype LEM was flight tested at Ellington Air Force Base. While NASA cameras record the test flight, Neil Armstrong struggles to control the unwieldy craft. Then, at approximately 300 feet, the lander flies wildly out of control. At the last second, Armstrong ejects. And floats to safety. If the lander was so unstable and difficult to fly in the controlled environment of Earth, then how could the LEM land 6 times flawlessly in the alien environment of the moon?
To have a powerful rocket engine blast the surface of the moon, blasting away all of the dust, and then find footprints surrounding the lunar lander, that to me would be an impossibility.
The fact that there's no blast crater under the LEM is one of the most conclusive pieces of evidence that I find supporting the hoax.
In fact, no sign of a blast crater is visible for any of the 6 lunar landings.
Then there's one other point. If they had truly landed on the moon, this dust would have then descended on the lunar lander, on the footpads, and we find not a trace of dust on the footpads. When I discovered that alone, I said, no way am I looking at a lunar lander that landed on the moon.
planet and are thousands of miles thick.
Any human being traveling through the Van Allen belt would have been rendered either extremely ill or actually killed by the radiation within a short time thereafter.
Every manned mission in history, Gemini, Mercury, Skylab, the space shuttle, has been below the radiation belt, all except going to the moon.
It's very interesting concerning radiation that the astronauts were protected by a thin film of aluminum, when here on Earth they put a lead shield on us when they take a dental x-ray.
A magnetic storm will come along, and that can increase the intensity of the radiation belts by maybe 1,000 times above what it was before.
According to Rene, the Apollo 16 missions coincided with one of the sun's most intense storms ever recorded. If NASA truly landed on the moon, remnants of the 6 successful Apollo missions would have been left behind. The base structures of the LEMs, the abandoned lunar rovers. Even the American flags would still be standing at each landing site.
I would like to invite NASA and all of their supporters to simply take the most powerful telescope on Earth and see if there's a lunar lander there. If there's a lunar lander there, I'll never say another word about an Apollo hoax. If there's no lunar lander there, I'll rest my case.
Did astronauts go 1,000 times farther 50 years ago than they can today? And believe me, they cannot go today, so it would be simply impossible for them to have gone with 1960s technology on the first attempt. It's simply impossible.
Well, I do want to say this, Bart. I think that one of the most important things I can share with people who are skeptical about whether we went or didn't go is that NASA, in its own words, with NASA astronaut Don Pettit, said that they have since destroyed all of the technology that got them to the moon, and it would be a painful process to build it back again. Now, does that make any sense? I'll play that clip right here.
I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond. The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again.
I haven't seen anything that indicates the telemetry data is even in existence, and as I said, even if we had it, we don't have the machines to play it back.
But your own research has shown the telemetry data is missing.
That's right.
And basically, he's saying that they spent $150 billion in today's dollars on the technology to go to the moon on the first attempt, and then they took all the equipment and all the schematics and they threw them in a furnace. Now, if you can point out one time in the entire history of the world when a technological advancement, like let's say the locomotive or the airplane or the nuclear bomb or an airplane that can fly faster than the speed of sound or the first computer, that any technology that they developed, that once they were done, they threw it and all the designs in a furnace. Now, if you can show me one time in history that that has happened before, then I'll say publicly that the moon landings are real. In fact, if you could show me, go out in the sun and have that astronaut shadow go 12 o'clock and the other one, go 9 o'clock in the sunlight, I'll say the moon landings are real. The fact that they destroyed all the information is proof itself that they didn't go. Because if they really went, the last thing they would do, Sean, would be to destroy the technology. I mean, the nuclear bomb, that technology should have been destroyed after World War II, but now nuclear bombs are 500 times more powerful. So if they really went to the moon, the last thing on Earth they would destroy would be the technology and the schematics. Unless they were covering their tracks after faking it so that no one would be able to figure out that the rocket didn't have enough fuel, the batteries didn't have enough to power air conditioning against 250 degrees, and the computers were not fast enough to synchronize from 0 mile per hour to 4,000 miles per hour in lunar orbit like they claim to have done. The fact that they did destroy the technology is proof itself that it was a fraud, because if they really went, they would have never done that. Now, the other clip you might want to show is of Kelly Smith, and you probably remember this now that I mention it. We can just show the clip here.
As we get further away from Earth, we'll pass through the Van Allen belts, an area of dangerous radiation. Radiation like this could harm the guidance systems, onboard computers, or other electronics on Orion. Naturally, we have to pass through this danger zone twice, once up and once back. Sensors aboard will record radiation levels for scientists to study. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space.
Kelly Smith just said that the technology to pass through the Van Allen radiation belts has yet to be invented.
We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space.
And most people don't realize this, but about 1,000 miles up is a layer of radiation, anywhere from 25 to 35,000 miles thick, that they would have to go through to reach the moon and back. In fact, it's the only time in human history where humans are said to have gone through the radiation. So the Orion project 3 years ago sent up a spacecraft into the radiation belts with 2 Geiger counters, U-turned and came back, and to read those Geiger counter readings. Not only did Kelly Smith say it's dangerous radiation, he says we must first develop protection before we can send people through this region of space, meaning the technology to go through the radiation belts with humans on board and survive has yet to be invented. I'm going to go ahead and mention something special. I will tie in a new video, digitized, edited, and ready to go, that someone sent me from like 1958 or 59 or 61. I don't know the exact year because on the reel of footage you can't tell, but it has even the countdown before it. It's a television program, I think, called Science Today, in which they went into great detail about the radiation belts. The inner belt is more than 7,000 times a safe dose, and the outer belt is more than 70,000 times a safe dose. They say so on national TV. I just got the reel and I just uploaded it. It's a private link, and we'll go ahead and tie it in with this. I'll put it on your channel, my channel, wherever. And it shows that the radiation belt is insurmountable. And even George Bush Jr., clever as he was, during one of the moon anniversaries, he says we're going to return to the moon as a logical first step to Mars and beyond after we learn how to protect astronauts from the lethal radiation. Well, wait a minute. You need to learn that first, and if we already did it 6 times, why would we go from a bicycle back to a tricycle? Why would it be a logical first step to Mars and beyond if we were already there 6 times? So basically, we have the very first vertical landing rocket occurred in 2017, not in 1969 on the very first attempt. Do you understand that? Because that was a vertical rocket, allegedly, landing on the moon that Neil Armstrong couldn't even fly successfully. The best pilot in the world could not fly that successfully on Earth, much less in the unproven environment of 1/4, 1/6 gravity, in the lunar atmosphere. So, when he allegedly descended vertically, and yet it took them up until 2017, 48 years later, before they could land a rocket vertically again, is proof that it didn't happen. I mean, Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic in 1927. Would it be 50 years before any nation on Earth would be able to fly across the Atlantic in an airplane? And yet that's what we're told to believe. 50 years later, there were millions and millions of aircraft had been built that broke the sound barrier, that flew up to 20 miles high, that were 747s, the size of a condo building, with multiple units being lifted off of the ground. In fact, the 747 was developed a decade later with a decade newer technology than Apollo, and it still took a year and a half longer than going to the moon for the first time, and it took 162 engine failures before they could lift that fuselage off the ground. And yet, the most complicated flying mission ever designed worked on the first occasion, which has never happened in the history of aviation, not even with the simplest machine, the Wright brothers motorized kite. I don't know how many times it took for them to get off the ground, just a few feet, but it took many times. And yet they're saying the most complicated flying machine, the most complicated flying mission of all time in the entire history of aerospace worked on the first occasion when a 747 built with 10 years better technology after millions of aircraft had already been built took 162 engine failures before the 163rd one lifted the fuselage off the ground. And believe me, they cannot go today, so it would be simply impossible for them to have gone with 1960s technology on the first attempt is simply impossible.